Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Chisora versus Wallin fight. And so if you are new around here and you have not yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So this is Chisora's seemingly penultimate fight in his career. Has said for the past few fights now that he wants to get to 50 fights no matter what, and to be fair, he's coming off a last performance where he got a win. And to be honest, for his career, I'm not too sure if he actually cares too much about, maybe, even being entertaining anymore. I don't know necessarily how much more he cares than just getting that 50 number. I don't really think he's too bothered about, winning or losing or anything like that. I think that's been very obvious for a while that he's not really cared about that. But that win has definitely, for the fans, I feel like reinstated a bit of interest into his final couple fights in his career, and just intrigue into how it can go, and if he can get a couple wins on the bounce, if he can perhaps, set up a big final fight for his career. And Chisora's just a fan favourite of British boxing. There's no real doubt about that. He has been for such a long time. He's created some amazing moments in British boxing, some really dramatic moments. I mean, the obvious one, him throwing that table at Dillian White, is probably one of the biggest ones in boxing history, one of the biggest moments. And so he's always been able to provide that entertainment, well, for the most part. And this is another opportunity for him to do so against an Otto Wallin who, perhaps wasn't the opponent in which a lot of people would have expected for this fight, and I'll touch more upon that in a moment. But he has gone away and been able to, get a win, which we'll talk about in a second. And so he's basically trying to recover after the bad defeat in which he took to Anthony Joshua. And before that, he was seen as the tricky southpaw who gave Fury a lot of problems. But after the AJ fight, his career was left in a bit of limbo of where he could actually go. Now he's picked up this opportunity, which, to be honest, you don't blame him at all for doing so. But in general, I think it is going to make for an intriguing contest. So to give a kind of base overview of this fight, Chisora is 35 and 13 with 23 KOs, and Wallin is 27 and 2 with 15 KOs. This fight is a 10-round fight in the heavyweight division. Chisora's last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Joyce, and Wallin's last fight was a win via KO in round 1 versus Warieme, which is most definitely not how you pronounce his name. Wallin is 6'5" with a 78-inch reach, and Chisora is 6'1" with a 74-inch reach. Chisora is 41 and Wallin is 34, and Wallin is a southpaw. And to speak a bit more about what I've just been talking about, like I mentioned, another 10-round contest for Chisora. He's very much used to that. I mean, at the same time, Wallin is very much used to going the full distance as well. Neither of them are inexperienced at a high level, and to be honest, I don't really think realistically experience is going to play too much of a factor for this fight, whereas perhaps it has done in previous fights in Chisora's career. Like I mentioned, they're both coming off wins. Chisora's one was, of course, as expected. If you're going to see a Chisora win nowadays, it's going to be a dramatic one, and it was. Joyce was kind of coming forward for the majority of the fight, and wasn't really doing too much. He looked very poor, and to be honest, I think he really just got showed up in this fight. Since both the Zhang fights, I think first of all his chin hasn't been the same, and second of all his skills have just been highlighted how poor they are. I mean, his mental fight IQ has never really seemingly been the best. I mean, the way that he speaks seemingly isn't the best, but yeah, like I mentioned, his fight IQ seems very poor, and he just looks like he can't really string together a good selection of punches anymore. It seems like his ability is pretty much completely gone, and to be honest, I really doubt we will see Chisora back in the big fights in the heavyweight division anytime soon. I mean, he's talking about fighting the winner of Dubois versus Parker, but realistically, he won't even make it into fighting the loser, because of the career progressions in which they both had. I mean, Joyce losing to Chisora, having a really mediocre fight versus Cash Ali, where it took him quite a lot of rounds to get him out today, and Cash Ali looked awful in that fight. And then, of course, like I say, the losses to Zhang as well. His career really has been highlighted as a downward spiral as of recent, and now he's back on a Bournemouth undercard, on the Ghana undercard on the Queensbury show, which is a very small show, and it's just showcases his career at this point. I mean, he's going to fight a nobody. He's going to be expected to win. I don't think he's going to look very impressive when he's winning. Well, when he's fighting again, he might be able to scavenge a win, but I really don't believe that's going to do enough to be able to propel his career again. And so, perhaps Chisora beating Joyce has maybe ended Joyce's whole career. We will have to wait and see. But, like I mentioned, a dramatic win, a win in which, of course, he got the knockdown as well, and, stopped a big guy in Joyce and a big name in Joyce as well, who, of course, has fought against some top level guys and been able to beat some top level guys. So for himself, that's a humongous win. And, perhaps he didn't really look like he it was too fussed about winning. But to be fair, when you compare his performances prior to that, when you look at the Gerald Washington performance and the Fury in the Trilogy fight performance, both of them were awful fights for Derek Chisora, and so he definitely seemed that bit more fired up against Joyce. Perhaps he saw more weaknesses and knew that he actually had a chance to come and really entertain the public back, main eventing, being the main focus, and he definitely was able to do that. So it was a very good win for his career. Like I say, I don't feel like it's gonna, revitalize his career. I don't think it's gonna bring another 5 more fights into his career, but for the most part, like I mentioned, it's definitely a good win for him. And then Wallin, his win was a unknown one. I mean, nobody even realized that he'd even fought, to be completely honest. It was on a smaller show in America, and it's definitely a get back type of fight. But a first round knockout for Wallin is something in which is very surprising. I mean, I don't know necessarily on paper, how many first round knockouts he has in his professional career, but it won't be many. And so that was a big win for him, even if it was against, a very poor fighter. It's definitely him going away and being able to get a win. That definitely could revitalize his mindset. I mean, he's not exactly lost against anybody bar the huge names. I mean, he lost versus Fury in that very close fight, which was, I suppose, to an extent what made his career. It brought the Fury effect. Just having the name of Tyson Fury on his record alone would have got him bigger fights, but the fact that he was able to rough him up and make it hard for him with the southpaw style in which he possesses, it showcased that he did have some decent world level skills about him. And like I mentioned, he probably wouldn't have got the fight versus Joshua if he hadn't have made it difficult to versus Fury. So it's definitely a Fury type of effect, his career, and just having that big name. And then of course the loss versus Joshua wasn't a good loss. And to be honest, the loss hasn't really aged that well. I mean, of course, he then went on to fight Ngannou, and at that point, you would say it did age well because of how good he looked versus Ngannou and the fact he was able to produce that devastating stoppage. But at the same time, he's then gone on to lose really badly versus Daniel Dubois and look very poor. So, perhaps the loss hasn't aged too well, but it's not you know, the end of the world. It's definitely not defined his career too much. So I definitely think he still has much more so to give than, perhaps you would say somebody like a Chisora might, or something like a Joyce might, if he was to have fought Joyce instead, if Joyce was to have beaten Chisora. But, like I mentioned, there is that height and that reach differential. If is that even a word, I'm not even too sure. But there is that height and reach difference, and Chisora is always used to punching up. I mean, his whole style is just the big overhands, and so he's very much used to it, and it's not really going to make too much of a difference. And I don't even think Wallin being a southpaw, which, like I say, is meant to be tricky, is going to be too much that Chisora isn't really used to. But, something I wanted to touch about with Chisora, obviously this is his second to last fight and he wants to get to 50 contests. But, I mean, I'm not saying that he has caused himself brain damage through his style, but he's definitely not helped himself. I mean, he's always going to be somebody who is going to take a lot of punishment in fights, and for the most part is going to get punched quite heavy. And so perhaps he looked at an opponent like Wallin, and I think he will probably want to go out for a bang in his last fight, Chisora, and will probably pick a heavy puncher. But he looked like at a fight to like a Wallin fight, and saw he's not really the heaviest of punchers, and perhaps is thinking he has taken enough punishment in his career, and more than enough punishment, and perhaps he is trying to an extent, conserve anything that he might have left in the brain department. And brain damage is not something in which you can overlook, especially in boxing. We've seen so many injuries, we've seen so many just tragic moments as a result of it, and Chisora definitely could be one of that just because of the amount of punishment in which he's had. And I don't necessarily know. I don't think anybody really knows where he kind of stands mentally in general. I mean, he's always got something going on. I mean, it wasn't that long ago since he punched that delivery driver, and so it's been a roller coaster in general with, like I mentioned, the whole of Derek Chisora's career. But I don't necessarily know if he cares too much at this point about actual brain damage. He might do, I'm not too sure, but it's definitely something in which, in fighters, this career path in which Derek Chisora has had, I don't think many fighters, first of all, will be able to will be able to, replicate it, duplicate it, but at the same time, wouldn't recommend many fighters going and trying to duplicate the kind of career in which Chisora has had. Obviously, he is kind of the definition of a gatekeeper type fighter. I mean, every fighter, to an extent, there has been some big heavyweights who have kind of slipped under the grasp of Chisora and having to fight him. I mean, AJ being one of them, but for the most part, pretty much the majority of big British heavyweights throughout the past 10 years have fought against Chisora and had to deal with his style, and he's definitely gone through generations of fighters, which is crazy for his career to be able to be prolonged for so long. And so the true definition of a gatekeeper is Derek Chisora, and of course he has been able to provide them shock wins, arguably at moments in which are least expected and are when people are thinking Derek Chisora is fully done, then he comes and gets a win. Like I mentioned, he was coming off poor performances versus, well, in the lead up to the Joyce fight, and before that, his last win was the Pulev win, which was a very close split decision. But to be fair, that win has aged very well. I mean, Pulev is currently a world champion. He is WBA regular world champion, and that's after beating Mahmoud Shah, who really didn't want to fight anybody and wanted to keep his belt for as long as possible. But so there's definitely perhaps even a possibility of Derek Chisora becoming, like I say, a world champion before he ends his career. Perhaps a rematch, well, a trilogy fight could be there for that of Pulev and Chisora, maybe. But that's a win that definitely has aged well, and another dramatic win. It seems like a lot of his wins at the moment are going to be shock, dramatic, very close fight type wins. I don't think he's really perhaps got that will and desire to really go and push for a knockout anymore. And at the same time, I don't think he's ever going to dominate enough of a fight to be able to win via unanimous decision. Of course, he is the British icon in which he is, and he's definitely going to be able to sell out anywhere he goes. I think it's going to be interesting to see how he sells out to the co-op arena. Of course, they've had one big, well, an MMA big event and a boxing big event there, but it's going to be intriguing to see how Derek Chisora does in the way of selling it. I mean, he's always got a big fan base and a big backing, but it's a true British backing. I mean, he hasn't got the, football fans on his side from his, area. He's not got, well, in general, people from his area on his side, and you see that being an important factor for people getting behind their fighters a lot of the time. He's just an interesting personality, and he's always, for the most part, going to provide the entertainment. So yeah, he does seemingly always headline very well, and is always able to sell well when he does headline, even if he is against an opponent in which nobody has really, followed too much or heard crazy amounts of positive things about in that way of Wallin. But of course, at the same time, when he does go out to retire, he is definitely going to, you'd like to think, still be around in boxing. He has his delicious TV or whatever, if that's even what it's called. He's got that, and he seems to enjoy getting up in people's business with that, even though, to be fair, personally, he seems to not really want to do too many interviews himself. But it seems like he's forever going to be involved in British boxing, and to be fair, it would be a shame if he wasn't. He manages quite a few fighters from what it seems as well. So, yeah, like I say, it seems like he is going to still float around the boxing scene and always pop up at certain times, even if it's like Ring Magazine events, even though, he's not going to win any awards anytime soon, you'd like to think. Like I mentioned, he has perhaps picked out this fight as a penultimate fight against Wallin because Wallin has less of a threat going into one last fight for that of Chisora, but it seemed very heavily like it was going to be a Jarrell Miller type of fight, and I would have personally preferred to see a Jarrell Miller fight. I think it would have been more interesting. I think it would have been more perhaps entertaining. I'm not too sure. Obviously this one definitely could be, but for the most part, I think it's going to be sad if we don't see Miller versus Chisora. I think that's definitely a fight to be made. I think there is still quite a few fights that on paper could be made for Derek Chisora. Obviously, we don't want to see him fighting forever because I've just been talking about brain damage. But for the most part, Jarrell Miller type of fights for a final fight, it's definitely not a fight in which I would be against seeing two kind of guys who's definitely just going to slug it out. And so, that's definitely, like I say, a fight in which could happen. But, Wallin is going to be tough. He could go on to win. Even if he wins, Chisora's going to fight no matter what. So there's no real it doesn't really matter too much if he wins. But Wallin, he's not your conventional type of heavyweight. That's been shown in his performances. His best win is the Gassiev win, and to be fair, that was a very good win. He was able to pick his shots, move around Gassiev pretty much the whole fight, made Gassiev look very poor as he was just continually walking forwards, and so perhaps there is a bit of a recipe there where he could go on to do that versus someone like a Chisora, but of course Chisora does offer different things to that of Gassiev, and Gassiev does offer different things to that of Chisora. So, like I mentioned, he's definitely just not your typical type of heavyweight Wallin. And to be fair, when you look at Swedish fighters, of course he is from Sweden. There's not really too many big Swedish fighters. I mean, Bedo Jack is a world champion, so that's one. But there's been a few fringe world level guys around, at the moment, but there's nobody crazy. Heavyweight wise, there definitely really hasn't been too many big Swedish names. So in that aspect, Wallin is kind of flying the flag there and, leading the way to an extent, and perhaps is going to inspire that next generation of Swedish fighters. But, we'd like to hope. I'm here for every nationality getting involved in boxing, seeing the talent there to be made, and so, that definitely could happen. And, of course, this is on a very good undercard for the most part. I mean, it was a really good undercard, but it has taken a bit of a hit. Obviously, I'm recording this on Tuesday, so things might change. It seems as though at the moment Hutchinson versus Parker, well, it's off. That's confirmed. Hutchinson has an injury, so it's off. But it seemed, well, Simpson has put his name forwards. Will Boxer let it? Probably not. Will Parker get another fight? Maybe. I was quite looking forward to Hutchinson versus Parker. I think it definitely had the makings to be a very good fight. Two fighters who have suffered world level defeats but haven't looked bad whilst doing so. And, Parker's on this rebuild run, and Hutchinson didn't lose badly versus Boatsi and had that hype behind him where he's fighting on Riyadh season shows. So I felt like the winner of that could have definitely gone on to go back to fighting on Riyadh season shows, or in Parker's case, having his first fight on a Riyadh season show. But, hopefully that fight will get rescheduled. And then, of course, Rafferty versus Macmillan is, I suppose, an intriguing contest. I mean, Rafferty was losing quite badly versus Turner before all of a sudden he managed to, land that one shot and flip it around, and then he got a Queensberry contract as a result of that. And to be fair, he does look quite limited as a boxer to an extent, and Macmillan might be able to expose that. I don't know too much about Macmillan, but it's perhaps an easier fight than that of Turner for Rafferty. So it's just going to be intriguing to see how they progress his career along, because of course he is British and I believe also Commonwealth champion at the same time. Abdullah versus Miller, I think, is an excellent fight. I think it's two very highly skilled fighters and two fighters in which I've had the pleasure of speaking to. And again, like I say, are definitely going to show that high level of skill. And Abdullah is looking excellent at the moment, and Miller has been in some very good fights and still is at a very high level in the British scene. And so, yeah, that is a great matchup in my opinion. And then, of course, Heaney returns as well. Interesting to see how he can go from the losses in which he's had in recent times and then return straight into a continental European title. And it's not a big title at all. Maybe they're just trying to do it to attract the fans to actually care about the fight a little bit more because, of course, he is that big ticket seller. It's also interesting to see that he's on it because, of course, like I mentioned, he has that ticket selling ability. And when I've touched on before, the co-op arena is a big arena, so they do need ticket sellers. And Rafty is able to sell quite well. Parker doesn't have a bad fan base himself. Heaney, again, another fighter who can sell quite well. So, there's definitely fighters there who can, rank up the ticket numbers to an extent. And so, yeah, it's just interesting to see how he's returning to a title fight, even though it isn't really a big title fight. But, yeah, is he deserving that? I'm not really too sure. But to speak about them both individually as fighters, both Chisora and Wallin, Chisora, the positives of what he does well. I mean, typically he is a bit of a back foot type fighter. He can come forwards, but for the most part, he is a back foot type fighter, and he's comfortable on the back foot, and he arguably does his best work there. He's very durable. He's strong-willed. That's been very much shown. It seems like with every fighter that he has at the moment, he's definitely able to take a big shot and keep coming back very well. He's not been, he got stopped versus Fury, but that was against Fury, and it wasn't really an awful stoppage. It wasn't really a devastating stoppage, but other than that, his performances in recent times have been strong-willed and durable, and he's been able to, take big shots at times, and so he's definitely strong-willed, perhaps more so than that of what we've seen so far from Wallin. He's always a threat, and he proved that in that last fight, of course, versus Joyce, where he landed that clubbing shot. Always a threat. He smothers your work. He does well to be able to smother your work, and in that aspect, he will frustrate you from doing that. And if he can do that versus Wallin, he might be able to slow down his movement. He is typically an inside type of fighter, whereas Wallin is not. So, who's going to be able to, maintain the distance better? He imposes his strength typically quite well. He's going to go to the body relatively well at the same time. Like I say, I feel like that performance versus Joyce, he came with that bit more desire to go to the body and rip in his clubbing shots more so, and actually try and start a bit of a tempo and show his levels of explosiveness to an extent. And so that was just in general nice to see. He's always going to come with hard shots. He's often able to entice you by sitting on the ropes, by being such back foot type fighter. It's not something in which you would recommend to a fighter coming up, but it definitely does entice you to come forwards. And when you aren't really used to that, and being able to walk forwards, like someone like Warren, you would think isn't able or isn't used to being able to walk forwards, he might get caught out being enticed in by that of Chisora. He steps into his shots very well. He's able to stop momentum quite well, and he definitely tests you, and he's definitely able to test your want and your will to win, and he does that very well. And he always, for the most part, is able to respond and is willing to respond to any shots in which he does take. Negatives about him, of course, he is very heavy-footed. It definitely generates his level of power. I don't think his power is, it's very good, but it's not crazy level. It's not like an Anthony Joshua level of power. It's just heavy-footed clubbing type of power. He's got, for the most part, not really much of a jab in which he uses. So, like I say, he's definitely going to invite you on and allow you to come forward in that aspect. He's not really got too much of a defense. Of course, he's got his hands low quite a lot of the time. He stands straight on. He's got no head movement. He's got no real defensive movement. Sometimes he'll come off the ropes, but for the most part, he's quite happy to sit on the ropes. So, and he also tires very quickly as well. So in general, he doesn't really have much of a defense at all. And he's a very big target, just there to be hit. He walks onto a lot of shots, and that's definitely something in which if he is going to start coming forwards versus Wallin, like Wallin did versus Gassiev, he might be able to have a lot of success just walking him on continuously. He overcommits to his shots. He can be very much outpaced, and Wallin could just make it a very boring fight and just try and outpace him, and that's most likely what I would recommend for him to do. He can be inconsistent, like I say, in his performances, going from that Gerald Washington fight to that Joyce fight. Very inconsistent, just his actual levels of ability, especially nowadays. He can be very predictable, reckless, like I mentioned, sits on the ropes and is happily just going to stay there. He's a big target, like I say. He accepts shots, he's messy, he slumps into the ropes and, can look a bit wobbly, off balance, just like I say, slumping around a lot of the time. Loads up on his shots, his reactions are slow, his speed's slow, and in general, I just don't necessarily know how much he does care, like I mentioned, about actually getting the win anymore. I think he's just happy to actually get through the fight, to be completely honest. And to speak more about Wallin as a fighter, he's definitely that bit more of a conventional type of boxer. For the most part, he's disciplined, but in that fight versus Joshua, I don't think he showed that level of discipline in which we used to from him. So will it show? Does that show that he's not really as disciplined as what we perhaps thought? He's got good footwork. He's got abilities to, move you around with his punches, but for the most part, kind of move himself around you with his punches, which is nice to see. And like I say, he could definitely do that whilst Chisora is walking forwards, whilst he is on the front foot. If he does go onto the front foot, he is, typically a back foot type fighter himself, Wallin. He's faster. I think he does improve throughout the fight and does come with quite a set game plan that he likes to follow. He's got solid straight shots, and when he can get his jab going, sometimes it takes a bit of time to find his range, but for the most part, when he gets his jab going, he's got some solid straight shots. He's, like I say, a mid-range type fighter. He doesn't stay on the ropes, unlike that of Chisora. He can catch you coming in. It's not like catching you with big heavy shots, but he can definitely catch you with a jab whilst you're coming in and point score in that aspect. He can, like I say, move around you well, and he definitely knows how to win rounds and pick up points and just, like I say, point scoring type of fighter. Negatives about him, I think he definitely over respects fighters. I mean, he didn't seem too keen about actually getting in range and finding his range too much against Joshua. He seemed like he definitely did over respect him, and if he's too reluctant like that against Chisora, he might get caught with a big shot. But at the same time, then he also tried to stand and trade a little bit versus Joshua when he was getting caught with shots. And if he gets caught with shots versus Chisora, then tries to stand and trade, then that's definitely going to go into Chisora's favour. He has the lesser power. He can be moved around heavily with punches, and so I definitely think if Chisora lands one of his big overhands, he could, maybe not drop him, but maybe be able to push him around whilst doing so. And like I say, he does impose himself physically well. He can be hesitant, Wallin. His physicality is much lesser. He is a slower starter and wants to fight at a slower pace. So unless he comes out faster, a slower pace and a slower starting pace would definitely go into Chisora's favour. He has been hurt, like I've kind of touched upon. He stays in range a bit too long, and if he's doing that versus Wallin, then against Chisora, he can definitely get caught, and I don't think he is able to deal with big overhands too well. I think he keeps his hands that bit higher than that of Chisora, but for the most part, I still believe that he does, drop it enough to be able to get caught with big overhands. He just didn't really experience that when he fought Fury, because Fury doesn't really throw too many big overhands, and didn't really experience that, to be fair, too much against Joshua either, but he can be caught with them. And his will to win, I don't necessarily know how much he actually has that will to win in him. This fight's definitely going to showcase that. His head movement, again, is also poor. Like I say, he also accepts the back foot. Chisora perhaps is the favourite for this fight. I'm not even too sure. It might be Wallin that's the favourite for this fight. I'm not really too sure. It could one or the other. But I think that Chisora is going to win via TKO in round 10. I think he is going to make it rugged. I think Wallin going into the later rounds, well, in the early rounds, is going to start off very slowly, and Chisora is going to be happy with that pace, even if he is trying to walk him down. Wallin might be able to make him look a little bit silly at times, but I think Wallin perhaps might get dragged into a fight if he gets caught with one big overhand, And then I think that big overhand could definitely be caught with on multiple occasions because, like I say, I think he's susceptible to being open with it. And also, if he has his minimal head movement and if he's standing quite tall and also standing in range, in which for a lot of the time he does, I think physically Chisora can wear him down, and I think he will wear him down, and I think his will to win definitely isn't there enough. And I think going into the last round, he's going to be able to get that stoppage, a late stoppage victory, and again, probably very dramatic in the fashion in which we are used to seeing with Derek Chisora. Then we could go on to fight next. I mean, there's definitely names like I mentioned that I would like to see him fight next, and Miller, like I've talked about, I feel like would be an excellent contest against two guys who are going to slug it out. I would love to see Miller come in very heavy for that fight as just a pure slug out war. Ngannou could be a good fight. There's been talks about him in Africa versus Chisora. That could be a good way to end things. Ngannou seemingly wants to go back to boxing and isn't really too keen about talking with UFC and isn't really too keen about fighting anybody in the PFL because there isn't really anybody in the PFL that's worthy of fighting Ngannou. So that could be a great contest as well. Wilder could be a good fight. Wilder seems like he's going to be fighting Harper in April, so if he gets through that, that could be a good contest to make. And perhaps you could even favour Chisora in that fight with what we've seen from Wilder as of recent. Maybe to an extent you could. White again. That fight again could be another good fight. White has seemingly called for that fight on multiple occasions. I don't necessarily know if White knows where he's going with his career at the moment. He's just fighting all over the place and getting attention from doing that and picking up some more wins again. But yeah, I'm not too sure where he thinks his career is going. But that could definitely be a huge British fight if White is allowed to fight in Britain. I'm not really too sure at the moment with the whole drugs things in which we've seen with him as of recent. Or, like I mentioned, Pulev again. It'd be a huge achievement for Chisora to go into his 50th professional fight for a world title, which would be, like I say, a huge achievement still, and then perhaps win against Pulev. I mean, he's done it once before. Obviously, he lost the first time, but you never know, that could definitely happen, and it would be a beautiful way to end his career, to be completely honest, for Chisora. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did indeed like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.